Ryan's voice came through the phone, sharp enough to cut skin, accusing me of abandoning my own baby, while she slept warm and breathing against my chest. I remember standing there in the kitchen, one hand gripping the counter, the other holding my phone, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. Isla was curled into me in her soft cotton onesie, that faint milky smell rising from her hair, her tiny fist knotted into my shirt like an anchor. When Ryan said my name, it wasn't the way he usually did. It was brittle, furious, afraid. "How could you do that to her, Chloe?" he said. I looked down at Isla, then back at the window above the sink where the afternoon light spilled in pale and ordinary. "Do what?" I asked, already feeling my heart begin to race. "You dump her on Talia every day," he snapped. "You don't even tell me," Dad said. Ryan. I cut in, my voice shaking now. "Isla is right here." Silence pressed hard against my ear. I could hear his breathing, uneven, like he was trying to decide whether I was lying. "That's not funny," he said finally. "I'm not joking," I whispered. "She hasn't left my side." That was the moment I felt something tilt, just slightly, in the world I thought I understood. Before that call, my life had been small in the best way. Measured in feedings and naps, and the slow miracle of watching a brand new person discover her own hands. Motherhood had narrowed my universe, but it had also deepened it. Our little house smelled like clean laundry and reheated soup. There were burp cloths draped over chairbacks, a white noise machine murmuring in the corner of the living room, and a quiet rhythm to our days that felt sacred. Ryan had been wonderful, tender in ways I hadn't known to expect. He'd learned to warm bottles to just the right temperature, pressing a drop on his wrist like a ritual. He took the early morning shift before work so I could sleep another hour, bringing Ela to me afterward with a proud smile, as if he'd accomplished something heroic simply by loving her. "Look at her," he'd say, rocking her gently. "She's perfect." His sister Talia had been a steady presence too. She worked from home, her laptop always open on the dining table, and she'd drop by with groceries or sit on the couch beside me while I fed Isla, asking quiet questions about how I was really doing. Talia had a soft way about her, observant, careful. She noticed things others missed. Ryan's parents lived across town. Patricia, his mother, called often, her voice warm but edged with concern. Frank, his father, was harder to read. He'd always been charming in a polished sort of way, the kind of man who smiled without showing much of what he felt. He brought gifts, tiny socks, a stuffed lamb, but he never lingered. He seemed impatient with the stillness of a newborn's world. Still, I thought we were a family finding its footing. So when Ryan accused me of something so unthinkable, my first instinct was confusion, not fear. "Ryan," I said again, softer now, trying to reach him through whatever story had already taken root in his mind. "Tell me exactly what you mean," he exhaled. "Talia's been watching Isla every day," Dad told me. "He said you were overwhelmed, that you asked him not to tell me so I wouldn't worry." I felt heat rush to my face, a mix of disbelief and something like shame, because part of me worried that maybe, in some universe, someone could believe that of me. "I've never left Isla with anyone," I said. "Not once. You know that." Another pause. Then, quieter, Dad wouldn't lie about something like this. The words landed heavy. Frank wouldn't lie. That certainty hurt more than the accusation itself. "I'm telling you the truth," I said. "Please, come home." When Ryan walked through the door an hour later, his face was drawn, his jaw tight. He didn't kiss me hello like he always did. He went straight to Isla, peering down at her as if to confirm she was real. When she stirred and made that small kittenish sound newborns make, his shoulders sagged. "She's here," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I said. "She's been here all day." We sat at the kitchen table, Isla between us in her bassinet, the room thick with questions neither of us knew how to ask yet. Ryan rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit I'd seen only a few times before. "Talia's been exhausted," he said slowly. "She mentioned it last week. Said she felt like she never had a break." I shook my head. "She's been working long hours, that's all." Ryan looked up, doubt flickering across his face for the first time. "Dad said he's been helping, bringing Isla over so you could rest." A hollow feeling opened in my chest. Ryan, why would I let your father take my baby without telling you? He didn't answer right away. He glanced at Isla again, then at me. I could see the conflict forming, the tug between what he'd been told and what he was seeing. We need to talk to Talia, he said finally. That night after Isla was asleep, we drove to Talia's apartment. The city lights blurred past the windows, and I pressed my palms into my thighs to keep them from trembling. My mind kept circling the same impossible thought. Someone was using my child as a story, as an excuse. Talia opened the door looking surprised, then relieved. "Oh, thank God," she said when she saw us. Her eyes went straight to my empty arms. "Where's the baby?" My heart skipped. "Isla's at home, asleep." The color drained from her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of my sister-in-law's apartment, I realized that whatever truth waited for us on the other side of this confusion was going to change everything. Talia stepped back as if the air between us had suddenly turned solid, something she needed space from. We followed her inside, the door closing with a soft but final click behind us. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and lavender cleaner, the same as always, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. "You're saying," she began, her voice careful, "that Isla has never been here?" Ryan nodded. Talia pressed her fingers to her temple. "But your dad, he's been bringing her. Every weekday, sometimes for hours." She looked at me then, her eyes glossy with confusion and something close to hurt. "He told me you were overwhelmed, that you cried when you asked him for help." I swallowed. "I've cried," I admitted, "but never to him, and never about wanting to be away from my daughter." Talia sank onto the edge of the couch. "He said you didn't want me calling you because it would make you feel like a failure." Her mouth twisted around the word. I hated that. But I believed him. Ryan let out a sound halfway between a sigh and a groan. "Dad told me the same thing, that you didn't want me to worry." We sat there, the three of us, pieces of the same lie laid out between us like broken glass. I replayed Frank's polite smiles in my mind, the way he always seemed to be in a hurry, how he'd avoided holding Isla for too long. I had never thought to question it. "What baby, Talia?" I asked quietly. "Describe her." Talia hesitated. "She's about 3 months old. Dark hair, big eyes. Frank said she favored you." She laughed once, sharply. I remember thinking that was strange because she doesn't look anything like you. A chill moved through me. Isla was only 7 weeks old. There was no way. Ryan stood abruptly, pacing. "This doesn't make sense." "Why would Dad lie about something like this?" None of us answered. The question hung there, heavy and unanswered. Talia looked up again, her face tightening with a new realization. "He was very specific about the schedule. He said consistency was important, that you trusted me." My stomach turned. Frank had planned methodically. "Did you ever see the baby's birth certificate?" Ryan asked. "No," Talia said. "He said you hadn't had time to file paperwork yet." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. When I opened them, I felt older somehow, like innocence had slipped away without asking permission. "We need to confront him," Ryan said. Together. The next morning we met at his parents' house. Patricia answered the door, her hair still pinned back from breakfast, a dish towel over her shoulder. "What's all this?" she asked, smiling until she saw our faces. Frank was in the living room, reading the paper like any other day. He looked up when we entered, his expression flickering with something I couldn't quite name. Calculation, maybe. "Chloe," he said pleasantly. "How's my granddaughter?" "Which one?" I asked. The room went still. Ryan moved closer to me, his presence solid and grounding. "Dad," he said, "tell us the truth. Right now." Frank folded his newspaper slowly. Too slowly. "I don't know what you mean." Talia's voice shook as she spoke. "You told me Chloe's baby was coming to my place every day. You told me not to contact her." Patricia's smile vanished. "Frank," he stood, smoothing the front of his shirt. "I was only trying to help." "Help who?" I demanded. His gaze slid away from mine. That was the first crack. Ryan's voice hardened. Dad, whose baby is that? For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed unbearably loud. Then Frank sighed, the sound weary, almost annoyed. She's mine, he said. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. Patricia stared at him. What did you say? Frank rubbed his face. I reconnected with someone from years ago. She had my child. She needs to work. I needed help. And you used my daughter's name, I asked. My voice barely steady. You used my baby as cover. He looked at me then, finally his eyes defensive. You have support. You have Ryan. That woman has no one. Talia stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. So you manipulated me. You made me think my sister, in law, couldn't handle her own child. Patricia's hands trembled. You did this behind my back. Frank's jaw tightened. I didn't want to burden you. A bitter laugh escaped Patricia. You didn't want to burden me, she repeated. You already did that years ago. Ryan turned to his mother, alarmed. What does that mean? Patricia closed her eyes. He had an affair once before. I forgave him. She opened them again, and there was steel there now. This time I won't. The room erupted then, voices overlapping, questions flung like accusations. Frank tried to defend himself, to justify his choices, but every word only dug him deeper. I'm filing for divorce, Patricia said calmly, cutting through the noise. Frank stared at her, stunned. Patty, no, she said. I'm done. Talia stepped closer to her mother, taking her hand. We're leaving, she said. Together. Frank looked around the room, at the family he'd dismantled with his secrets. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I thought of Isla, asleep in her crib at home, safe and loved. And I understood, with painful clarity, that lies don't just bend reality, they break trust in ways that can never be fully mended. We left Frank's house in a silence that felt heavier than any argument. Outside, the morning air was sharp and clean, completely indifferent to the wreckage we'd just uncovered. I rode home with Ryan, my hands folded in my lap, my mind replaying Frank's confession over and over again. She's mine. It echoed like something obscene, something that never should have been said aloud. When we got home, I went straight to Isla's crib. She slept on her side, her lips parted, her chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm that had already become the metronome of my heart. I touched her cheek with the tip of my finger, grounding myself in the undeniable truth of her existence. I'm so sorry, I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. Ryan leaned in the doorway, watching us. His face looked older than it had just days ago, lines carved by disappointment and a grief that hadn't yet found its shape. I don't understand how he could do this, he said quietly. To you, to Talia, to Mom. I didn't answer right away. Understanding felt impossible. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted, from confusion to resolve. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls and fractured conversations. Patricia packed a suitcase and moved into Talia's apartment, her movements precise, almost ritualistic, like she was afraid to stop and feel too much. Talia worked from the kitchen table now, her laptop pushed aside to make room for her mother's tea mug. Frank called Ryan repeatedly, left messages. Apologies wrapped in self-pity, explanations that leaned heavily on words like mistake and stress. Ryan listened to one voicemail with me, his jaw clenched. When it ended, he deleted it without a word. The mistress, her name was Diane, made herself known through a lawyer. There was no tenderness in her demands. Child support, back payments, no visitation rights beyond what the court would mandate. Frank, suddenly stripped of charm and leverage, had nothing to bargain with. One afternoon, Talia came over while Isla napped. She sat at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee. I held that baby, she said softly. I sang to her. I thought she was my niece. My throat tightened. You were lied to, I know, she said. But it still hurts. I reached across the table and took her hand. In that moment, I realized something important. Frank's greatest theft wasn't time or labor, it was trust, and we were the ones left to rebuild it. Patricia joined us for dinner that night. She helped fold laundry while Ryan cooked, her movements slower than before, but steadier too. After we ate, she asked to hold Isla. I watched her cradle my daughter, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I stayed the first time because I believed people could change, she said. Maybe they can, but not if they never face the truth. The house felt fuller with her there, not louder, just warmer. Like something broken had been replaced with something honest. Weeks passed. The chaos settled into a new normal. Frank faded from our daily lives, his presence reduced to legal paperwork and occasional updates from Ryan, each one duller than the last. The mistress moved on quickly. Frank, left behind, was forced to confront the consequences of choices he'd long avoided owning. One evening, as I rocked Isla to sleep, Ryan sat beside me on the bed. "You know," he said, "Dad always wanted control, over everything. I think he thought he could manage this too." I kissed Isla's forehead. "Children aren't problems to be managed." "No," he agreed. "They're people to be loved." The truth of that settled over us like a blessing. As spring turned to summer, our family found its footing again, not the one we'd had before, but a stronger, more deliberate version. Bound not by obligation, but by honesty. And sometimes late at night when the house was quiet and Isla slept between us, I thought about how easily everything could have gone differently if we hadn't asked questions. If we'd trusted a lie because it came from someone familiar, but lies don't become harmless just because they're told with a smile. They grow, they spread, and eventually they demand to be seen. The first time Frank showed up at our door and announced, Ela was screaming herself red in the face, and I was pacing the living room with her pressed to my shoulder, whispering nonsense prayers and half-remembered lullabies. The doorbell rang once, sharp, insistent. Ryan froze mid-step. We looked at each other, a shared understanding passing between us before either of us spoke. "I'll get it," he said. I stayed where I was, rocking Isla, my heart thudding harder than it should have. Through the thin wall, I heard the door open, and then Frank's voice. "Son, I need to talk to you." There was no warmth in it, no authority either. Just urgency wrapped in exhaustion. "This isn't a good time," Ryan said. "I won't be long." I stepped closer to the hallway, enough to see them but not enough to invite conversation. Frank looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders slumped. His hair, once carefully kept, was uncombed. He glanced past Ryan and saw me, then Isla. For a moment, something like longing crossed his face. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said, his eyes fixed on the baby. "That doesn't matter," I said quietly. "You did," he flinched, as if struck. Ryan crossed his arms. "Why are you here?" Frank exhaled heavily. "Diane's suing me for full support. Retroactive." He laughed bitterly. "She says I owe her for years I didn't even know about." "And?" Ryan asked. And I thought, maybe you could talk to your mother. "She won't answer my calls." The audacity of it left me breathless. "You used my child's name to hide your affair," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You manipulated your daughter into unpaid childcare, and now you want sympathy." Frank's eyes filled. "I'm still her grandfather." "No," Ryan said sharply. "You're the man who lied to all of us." Isla let out a soft hiccup against my shoulder, her crying finally easing. I felt a sudden clarity, clean and bright. "You don't get access to her," I said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." Frank looked between us, desperate. "Chloe, please." Ryan stepped forward, closing the distance. "Leave." Frank hesitated, then nodded once, defeated. As the door closed behind him, I felt something settle in my chest. Not guilt, not triumph, just finality. And a fan. That night I cried in the shower where no one could hear me. Not for Frank, but for the illusion of family I'd lost. For the idea that elders always knew better. That experience equaled wisdom. In the weeks that followed, the truth spread through the family like a slow-moving tide. Aunts called. Cousins whispered. Some offered apologies for believing Frank's version of events. Others stayed silent, unsure where loyalty should land. Patricia, meanwhile, transformed in small, startling ways. She cut her hair shorter, started taking long walks in the evening. She laughed more freely now. One afternoon, she sat with me on the back porch while Isla slept in her stroller. "I keep thinking I should feel ashamed," she said. "Like I failed by staying the first time." I shook my head. "You believed in forgiveness." She smiled faintly. "And now I believe in boundaries." Talia joined us later, her laptop under her arm, her eyes tired but clear. "I told my boss I'm reducing my hours," she said. "I need time to recalibrate." Patricia reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you." I watched them together, mother and daughter, bruised but unbroken, and felt something hopeful bloom. That evening, Ryan and I talked long after Isla fell asleep, about trust, about legacy, about what kind of grandparents we wanted in her life, and what kind of parents we wanted to be. "I don't want her growing up thinking love means secrecy," Ryan said. I rested my head on his shoulder. "Or that loyalty means silence." Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The house creaked and settled around us, holding our quiet resolve. Frank stopped calling after that. His absence became its own answer. And in that space he left behind, something better began to grow. The legal fallout arrived quietly, not with sirens or raised voices, but in manila envelopes and measured phone calls. It was strange how something so destructive could unravel in such an orderly way. Ryan's mother received the divorce papers first. Patricia sat at the kitchen table, reading them with the same focus she used to give crossword puzzles, her glasses perched low on her nose. When she finished, she folded them neatly and slid them back into the envelope. "I feel lighter," she said, almost surprised by the words. Talia nodded. "That's how you know it's right." Frank tried one last time to salvage his image. He sent emails to extended family, carefully worded explanations that framed his actions as misguided love, rather than calculated deception. A few people reached out to me, asking gently if there had been a misunderstanding. I answered each one the same way, calmly, factually, without bitterness. "There was a baby," I said. "It just wasn't mine." After that, the questions stopped. Diane's lawsuit moved quickly. Frank, who had always prided himself on staying ahead of consequences, found himself behind for the first time in his life. Child support payments were garnished from his retirement account. His social circle thinned. Invitations dried up. I didn't celebrate any of it. Justice didn't feel like victory, it felt like gravity. An inevitable return to balance. One afternoon, Patricia and I took Isla for a walk. The air smelled of cut grass and warming pavement. Isla slept through most of it, her tiny mouth forming an O, her lashes resting against her cheeks. "I used to think keeping the family together was my responsibility," Patricia said, "no matter the cost." I adjusted the stroller. "What do you think now?" She considered. "I think my responsibility is to tell the truth, especially to myself." When Isla was 4 months old, she laughed for the first time. A sudden, bubbling sound that startled all of us into stillness before joy broke across the room like sunlight. Talia clapped her hands. Ryan's eyes filled instantly. Patricia covered her mouth, laughing through tears. In that moment, Frank fished very far away. Our home changed shape in small, meaningful ways. Patricia kept a toothbrush in the guest bathroom. Talia came over 3 evenings a week, sometimes with work, sometimes just to sit on the floor and talk to Isla like she was an old friend. Ryan started cooking more, experimenting with recipes he'd saved but never tried. And I, slowly, carefully, stopped feeling like I needed to defend myself. One evening, after Isla was asleep, Ryan and I sat on the back steps, sharing a cup of tea. "Do you ever wonder if he regrets it?" Ryan asked. I thought for a moment. "I think he regrets being caught. I don't know if that's the same thing." Ryan nodded. "I don't want to carry his choices with me." "You don't have to," I said. "We get to choose differently." As summer faded into fall, the last loose ends tied themselves off. The divorce was finalized. The court settled child support. Frank moved to a smaller apartment across town. No one talked about him much, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked steadier, less like someone bracing for impact, more like someone rooted. I realized then that the betrayal hadn't broken us, it had revealed us. Showed us who we were when honesty was the only option left. That night, as I rocked Isla before bed, I whispered promises into the dark. "You will never be used," I told her. "You will never be someone's secret." Her breathing evened out, trusting and complete. And I knew whatever came next, we would face it together, in the open. By the time Isla learned to roll over, the story had become something we carried instead of something that carried us. It showed up now and then, at family gatherings where chairs sat empty, in the careful way Patricia introduced herself as divorced without flinching, in the way Ryan stiffened slightly whenever his phone rang with an unknown number. But it no longer dominated the room, it lived at the edges, where scars belong. The first big family event without Frank was a small backyard birthday for a cousin's child. Paper lanterns swayed in the late afternoon breeze. Someone grilled burgers. Children ran barefoot through the grass, shrieking with laughter. I wore Ela in a soft wrap against my chest. She babbled happily, tugging at my necklace. An aunt approached me, hesitant. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I wasn't sure if it would be awkward." "It's only awkward if we pretend nothing happened," I replied gently. She nodded, relief crossing her face. "You handled it with such grace." Grace. I'd never thought of myself that way. I thought of sleepless nights and clenched jaws and the quiet work of choosing calm over fury. Later, Patricia sat beside me, watching Isla chew on a wooden ring. "I used to think dignity meant staying quiet," she said. "Now I think it means standing still while the truth speaks." Ryan joined us, handing me a glass of lemonade. Our fingers brushed, familiar and grounding. "I'm proud of us," he said simply. So was I. The final consequence came not with drama, but with distance. Frank stopped trying, stopped calling, stopped explaining. His absence hardened into permanence. I heard through family channels that Diane had moved on, found a partner, stabilized her life. Frank saw his child occasionally, under strict court arrangements. No one spoke of reconciliation anymore. One afternoon, months later, I found a small package on our doorstep. No return address. Inside was a silver bracelet, delicate and expensive, and a note in Frank's careful handwriting. "For Isla. I hope one day she knows I'm sorry." I held it for a long time, the metal cool in my palm. Then I placed it back in the box, sealed it, and put it in the closet. Some apologies are for the person giving them, not the ones receiving. That evening I told Ryan. He nodded, unsurprised. "You did the right thing. I don't want her growing up with a gift that comes with a shadow," I said. Patricia overheard us and squeezed my shoulder. "That's wisdom," she said. As winter approached, we started new traditions, Sunday breakfasts, long walks bundled in coats, story time with all of us on the living room floor. Isla's world was expanding, first with sounds, then with smiles, then with recognition. Every milestone felt like a quiet victory. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the house wrapped in silence. I thought about the version of myself from months ago, the new mother, unsure, trusting too easily in the stability of others. I didn't judge her. I thanked her. She had loved without armor. Now I loved with intention. Families, I'd learned, aren't defined by who shares your blood, but by who protects your truth. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt certain of one thing. Nothing built on lies could ever feel like home. Healing didn't arrive all at once. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces so small I almost missed them, moments stitched quietly into our days, asking nothing of us except presence. The first time I left Isla with Talia again, my hands shook as I handed over the diaper bag, not because I didn't trust her, but because memory is stubborn. Trauma doesn't listen to logic. It waits for repetition to soften it. Talia noticed immediately. "Hey," she said gently, meeting my eyes. "We don't have to do this yet." I took a breath. "I want to." She nodded, understanding more than I could explain. When I returned 2 hours later, Isla was asleep on Talia's chest, her tiny hand curled into the fabric of Talia's sweater. Talia looked up and smiled. No guilt, no hesitation, just love. Something unclenched inside me. Patricia's healing took a different shape. She began therapy, something she'd once dismissed as indulgent. Every Thursday afternoon, she came home quieter, more reflective. Sometimes she shared pieces of what she was learning. I spent years believing that endurance was the same thing as strength, she told me one evening as we washed dishes side by side. And turns out, strength is knowing when to stop enduring. Ryan changed too, subtly at first. He listened more closely, asked questions he used to avoid. He was no longer the man who assumed parents were infallible. He was becoming a father who understood accountability. One night, while feeding Isla her bottle, he looked at me and said, "If I ever make you doubt your place in this family, I want you to tell me immediately." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're allowed to be human," I said. "We just can't be dishonest." As for me, I learned how to sit with anger without letting it turn corrosive. I let myself feel it fully, then set it down. Some days that meant long walks with Isla strapped to my chest, the rhythm of my steps calming my thoughts. Other days it meant journaling late at night, writing letters I never intended to send. One was to Frank. I didn't excuse him. I didn't insult him either. I wrote the truth, that what he had done robbed me of my sense of safety during the most vulnerable season of my life. My cum-tongue. That he had used my motherhood as a tool, and that was something I would never forget. Then I tore the letter into neat strips and threw it away. Closure doesn't always require an audience. The family we had now felt smaller, but clearer, cleaner. There were no secrets humming beneath the surface. No smiles stretched too thin. On Isla's first birthday, we gathered in the backyard. Balloons bobbed gently in the breeze. A small cake sat on the table, waiting to be destroyed by curious fingers. Patricia held Isla as we sang. Talia filmed, laughing when Isla smeared frosting across her nose. Grass her nose. Ryan stood behind me, his arms wrapped loosely around my waist. I watched my daughter, safe, adored, unburdened, and felt something like gratitude rise in my chest, not for what we lost, but for what we refused to normalize. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat on the floor beside Hyla's crib, watching her sleep. I thought about how easily lies can masquerade as protection, how often women are told they're too fragile for truth, especially when they become mothers. And I thought about how dangerous that belief is. We didn't heal because Frank was punished. We healed because we chose honesty over comfort, boundaries over tradition, truth over illusion. I stood and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked just enough. Some legacies end not with forgiveness, but with clarity. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of peace. Sometimes late at night, when the house is finally quiet and Isla's breathing drifts softly through the baby monitor, I think about how close I came to doubting myself. How easy it would have been to apologize for something I didn't do. How tempting it would have been to stay silent to keep the peace. How familiar that pressure is, especially for women, especially for new mothers. We're taught to absorb discomfort, to carry other people's secrets if it keeps the family intact, to confuse sacrifice with love. But here's what this experience taught me, slowly, painfully, and permanently. Truth does not destroy families. Lies do. What we built after Frank was not a replacement family. It was the family that had been waiting to exist all along, one rooted in honesty, accountability, and choice. Patricia didn't lose a husband. She gained her voice. Talia didn't lose trust in family. She learned where her loyalty truly belonged. Ryan didn't lose a father. He became one, fully, consciously, and differently. And Isla will grow up never wondering why adults whispered around her name. Never carrying the weight of someone else's shame, never being told that love requires silence. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a truth you're afraid to speak, if someone has asked you to protect a lie for the sake of family, if you've been made to feel dramatic, selfish, or cruel for wanting honesty, I want you to know this. You are not breaking anything by telling the truth. You are simply refusing to live inside someone else's deception. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Or would you have chosen truth, even if it changed everything? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're walking through something similar, know this, you are not alone. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.